but we're live again. So we're live again, literally 10 hours after my last interview. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to anyone watching live now or later on the stream or the podcast. It's my pleasure to be joined by Dirk Strasser today. Dirk, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yes, and looking forward to the interview.
Right.
Right.
So first of all, so tell us a little bit about yourself, because you are, I think, German, but you're based in Australia by your accent, obviously. So there's a story there.
Oh, well, I was born in Germany, but my parents immigrated to Australia when I was 3 years old, and I've lived in Australia apart from that, all my life. So, I mean, Australia is a country of immigrants. So, I don't know. I think it's some figure like 50% or over 50% of people either were born overseas or had one or more parents born overseas or something. So it's not that uncommon to have a different background to and say you're Australian, but still recognise your origins as well. There's a lot of people in that category. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, just out of curiosity, so how's your German? Because I know some of your books are translated into German. So have you done that yourself, or?
No. That is well. First of all, translation is a skill in itself. It's quite different and very highly specialised. I could maybe at one stage have a go at translating from German into English, but it would have been a lot of effort. But definitely not the other way around. My German is now really rusty. I just neither of my parents are alive anymore, so that was sort of a lot of the day-to-day German that I would have heard. Although their English was pretty good, so it was sort of a bit of a mixture anyway. So my German, in a past life, I was a German teacher, so it was pretty good at that point. And I studied German literature at university. So I had more of a sort of passive, you'd call it more of a passive understanding of German. I could read it very well. And when people spoke, I could understand it very well. But when it came to having complex conversations in German, I would really struggle. Just day-to-day things you can get by with. But I certainly have now, and now it's really rusty. I would have to go to Germany again for a few weeks for it to really come back again. I'd be really struggling at the moment to have a conversation in German. I just have to think very carefully. But I think I can still understand most things, unless the conversation gets really technical, sort of thing.
Okay.
But yes, no, I didn't have it was just my novels and a number of short stories were translated into German, but they were done by proper translators, not by me.
Right. So why German? Like, is it because you've got the connection there? What?
How did I get them published in German? I think, like a lot of things, there's always luck involved. There's just luck involved. I remember reading it was a fanzine in Australia, and it mentioned that there was a guy called Franz Rottensteiner, who's Austrian, was looking for stories, I think Australian stories, had a connection to Australia, and he was looking for Australian stories he wanted to translate into German. So, and there was a contact email. So I just contacted him. He was an agent, and he said, "Well, look, do you want me to be your German agent? I'll sort of do this." And he was the one that got all of that stuff done for me. And it was just luck. I saw his name, and what are the chances that I would have seen his name in that fanzine? It was sort of just buried in the middle of a large article. There was just and it wasn't really even a fanzine that I would have read regularly, or certainly not all the way through. And he was just fantastic. He ended up retiring, or else I think I would have had more recent success in Germany. But he obviously sort of associated, like the fact that I had a German background and that we had that connection. So yeah, it was just through that connection that turned out to be the case, and it was luck.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because it sort of ties up. When I interviewed Joshua Bilmes, who's the head of one of the big literary fantasy agencies in the US, he said that like he does care about the person, the author. So if he finds the person interesting, he'll be more willing to take on the books or look at their work. So it's sort of interesting that not only do you have to be an accomplished writer, but you need to have some kind of personal story to you to bolt on to that.
Yes, I think we're all like that. I think I mean, I've in my day jobs, I've sort of spent time interviewing people for positions, and it's always you end up picking someone. I think most people do this, who you like in some way, or connect with in some way, or think are similar to you in some way, or interesting in some way, over and above some of the technical aspects of that. You sort of, I think, in all walks of life, that's the case. This sort of personal connection, or something about that person that makes it interesting, and they do that. I don't know if you have a lot of these reality shows in Spain, but we have a lot in Australia, a lot of reality shows. A lot of them spend enormous amount of time on the backstory of the person, and it's usually the story that they have about something that's happened in their life, rather than if it's a talent quest or something, rather than the actual talent they have or whatever. And that's what gets them success and sort of airtime. So it's it's not always just pure skill or ability or whatever. There's all sorts of factors involved in that sort of thing.
Yeah, that reminds me. Few years ago, when I was still living in the UK, I was the head of maths of a secondary school there. I was in charge of hiring people, and I had a couple of young guys still at university doing the teacher training, and we could hire one of the two of them. And on paper, I wanted to hire kind of the less skilled one, and the head of school was like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Yeah, because I can actually work with this guy. I can shape him. I can train him up. This other guy, I can see is a lot more reluctant to sort of receiving feedback or listening to instructions. So I think I can sort of mold this person." And even in literary agency world, in writing, still personal relationships, isn't it? So you're still going to be able to work with the person.
Mm. Apart from Franz Rottensteiner, the other agents I've worked with, I haven't had a lot of luck with, I'd have to say. I don't think I've really come across the agent where the two of us click and are on the same page. I mean, some of them have been really good agents, and I'm sure they've been good agents to other authors, but it just hasn't worked for me. So, yes, that's sort of that's a whole big issue in terms of trying to find an agent that's going to sort of be effective for you, for the sort of person you are, and exactly the sort of writing that you do.
But it's not only the agent, then you also got the editor. And when an editor comes back to you and says, "Hey, Dirk, we're going to chop off 10,000 words here," you're going to have to battle that as well. So, yeah.
Yes. I mean, relationship, usually, I mean, the editors I've worked with have never said anything like that. It's always been stuff that's sort of made what I've written better, I think. But you can get, I mean, that issue though of saying you've got to cut 10,000 words, that becomes, I think I was asked at one point to cut 40,000 words, I think, on something, and that was, I just said, well, can we make it 2 books then? That was the only alternative I could come, cutting 40,000 words out of it.
Yeah, I want to come back to this point later, because there's something I want to ask you specifically about your novel Conquist, but we'll get there. So you mentioned that you got background in sort of German literature. I think you said at university.
And I always followed my interests in school. I chose subjects that sort of were from all over the place. I mean, because I've always had a big interest in mathematics as well. So we're sort of fellow ex-maths teachers.
Yeah.
I moved from teaching maths into maths publishing, textbook publishing. So yeah, so it's my my background is from all over the place. I have a fascinating. I love, probably my favorite subject was history, but I didn't actually continue with that at uni. I did some history at uni, but I didn't. So, and I was also interested in politics. It was, there's just too much to be interested in, and education and sort of life forces you to specialize. So it made it difficult. I just sort of always tried to keep my things spread as widely as I could have them for as long as possible, in terms of, the things that I sort of was worked in, and was sort of what I learnt at university and so on. But I ended up probably being most specialized in mathematics, and people who don't know that I write fantasy or science fiction often are quite surprised, and I thought you're a maths person, and vice versa. I sort of, I've sort of, I suppose, had the two things quite separate, and people would always say, "Well, you're the same Dirk Strasser that wrote that maths textbook," it's sort of a bit schizophrenic, I suppose, in a way. But
no, because your experience is very similar to mine. Because I try to keep the channel and the podcast sort of hidden from my students. I don't want them messing around in the comment section. I don't want them. But when they found out, it's like, "But you're a maths teacher. Why did you like reading? What?
Yeah.
You talk about books? You got a podcast, but you're a maths teacher." And they couldn't. It's like you said, it's like the expectation is that you're pigeonhole. You are Dirk Strasser, the maths books publishing guy. What are you doing? Has there been a barrier for you, or have you had to overcome that sort of pigeonholing?
Well, it's not really a barrier. It's not like having, writing in two genres where you sort of try to force them apart. It's just that I have an interest in both, and it's difficult to do both. Like for example, the last few years I've been writing a number of very large senior maths textbooks, and you can't do anything. I can't do anything fiction-wise during that time, even though I would have liked to. And I enjoy it. I like doing that as well. It's not like I hate doing that, and but I do like to find a lot more. I would like to find more time now to concentrate on the fiction, which is what I'm going to be concentrating on over the next few years. So I've had sort of periods where I've done that, but not. It hasn't been a consistent thing, day after day, week after week, year after year. I mean, I know a lot of writers do that. They sort of just write constantly, or they're involved with their fiction constantly. Whereas, although I've done a lot of writing, it's been a mixture between fiction and the textbook writing.
Right, and so let's talk a little bit about your literary output then, because you've got your series, the Books of Ascension, and the Books of Aurealis, if my pronunciation is right, and then Conquist. So which one came first?
Okay. Well, Aurealis, first of all, is a magazine that we started publishing in 1990. That's why there's an awful lot of them. We started in 1990 when, and it's a science fiction fantasy and with some horror in it as well, magazine. And a friend of mine, Stephen Higgins, and I started that because we actually met in a creative writing class, and we were the only ones interested in speculative fiction there. It was a literary person, from the sort of literary establishment, giving the teaching us, and we'd sort of look at each other and, "Oh, this isn't, we're sort of out of this a little bit. They're not interested in what we have to say." So we thought, we sort of bonded in our love for fantasy and science fiction. We thought, what a good idea, we'll start an Australian science fiction fantasy magazine, because there wasn't one around at the time. It had folded. It was a bit of a desert in terms of opportunities for you to sell short stories to. So we started that in 1990, which is a long time ago, and we've just kept it up since then. It's now well, easily the longest running magazine of its type in Australia. It's also the best-selling, top-selling one, and that's another thing that takes up a lot of my time as well. Although there are sort of up to 30 people involved with it.
Oh, wow.
It's it's a big deal organisationally as well to do that. But there's a lot of people who give an awful lot of time towards it because it's so valuable as a market for Australian SF short story writers. So many writers have had their start by having a story in Aurealis for the first time. So that's an important part of the other side of what I do in the speculative fiction field. I would say that came first. That magazine came first and is still going. But I mean, also Stephen Higgins and I were joined by another friend of mine, Michael Pryor. So the three of us run it now, but we've got, as I said, we've got a huge team who basically do a lot of work for that. So that was first. The Books of Ascension started with a book called Zenith. That was in the early 90s, 93, I think it was. It was published by an Australian publisher. It was only at that time, it's a very different time to now. It was only published in Australia and New Zealand. It was there were no ebooks, obviously, at that time. And then a couple of years later, I did the second book in the series, although it wasn't called a series at that time, but it was a direct book 2 of the series. At that time, and then called Equinox, and then the publisher, which was Macmillan, or Pan Macmillan in Australia, it was called, which is sort of a huge publisher, but they decided we're getting out of Australian science fiction and fantasy. We're not doing any more. They cut everyone mid series.
Right.
I had one more book to go. It was going to be a trilogy. So that threw me a lot actually, in terms of that happening. And the market in Australia for novels, for science fiction and fantasy, is patchy at best. I mean, you still get some happening, but otherwise it's hit or miss. Or now there's a lot of smaller press that do a lot of good work, but in terms of the big publishers, they're not. It's not like in the UK, and it's not like in the US. It's really tricky to find someone who really understands SF, and so I ended up a number of years later. Macmillan established an e-book only imprint, which was very common at the time, and I said to the person who was running that, look, I've got these 2 books that I've written by the way, I've written the 3rd book because the 3rd book was needed because my German agent had sold it to Germany, so I had to. It was printed in Germany before it was printed in English. So I had the 3rd book written. I said, look, I've got the 3rd book. Why don't you reissue the first 2? And you can have the 3rd one. It's you're giving something that hasn't been published before. And he said, great, this is going to be fantastic. And it was the Momentum imprint. But then the Momentum imprint just ended up being folded into the general. And again, this is Macmillan. However, they didn't do any print books at the time. So I decided to, because I had the rights back to, or the print rights anyway, back for both Zenith, Equinox, and the 3rd one was Eclipse. And I just sort of I published it under the Chimera Publications in print, which is the company that we run that produces Aurealis magazine. So it was small press effectively. And so they are all available. All 3 books are available in print that way, and also in ebook still via that my Macmillan So they're still available, but that's the story of the Books of Ascension, which is why I call the third book the Lost Book of Ascension, because it sort of got lost in the process. And also, it is about the Books of Ascension is a trilogy about a trilogy in a way. I mean, it would take too long to explain, but it's actually a book. It is about 3 different books. So it sort of fitted in with that, and the third one was lost as well. So that was that. So I have since then. There's been I've written a number of others, a couple of other novels, but I haven't been entirely happy with it. I'm rewriting a couple of the moment. So Conquist was the one that I sort of was probably. I thought this is the one that I've spent the most time in over the last 5 years to get to the point where it is today. It's the one that I think is the easily has the most potential in terms of sort of sales. It's just I sort of learnt a lot from the other writing that I'd done, and also when you read a lot of short stories that come into Aurealis, you sort of get a feel for what not to do after a long period of time, and what to do when you think, wow, that's really working, and why is that sort of working? So you sort of get a feel over time, and I think Conquest is by far the best thing I've written so far, and it's so that gives you an idea of the order in which those sort of things occurred.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Aurealis for a second, because I'm really curious and interested there. Because correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that the literary magazine sort of format had kind of had its time and died a long time ago, but it feels like a callback to those pulp magazines of the 30s, or maybe the more speculative stuff of the 60s in the UK, to have a magazine where short stories and short fiction gets published. There cannot be very many left in the market in the present day.
There are many similar magazines around.
Right.
There are many. I think in the UK, well, I mean, Interzone's still around in the UK, and that's been around for a long time. But it is. I mean, they're different to the way they were in the time that you're thinking of them, because they all are they either have an ebook version, or they are only ebooks. Aurealis started off as a print only, and then for quite a long time it's been ebook only, and it's, I don't know, it's still the same. I mean, short stories are still popular. Where there are an awful lot of people who write and people who read short stories, and the magazines. I could, the list of magazines that publish speculative fiction, many, and they also, what we now have, I think we have way more than what we did in a number of, I don't know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or whatever. And they specialize. They say they're really looking for very specific type of speculative fiction, not just broad, a broad church. Aurealis, I think we're different to most of the others because we accept a really broad definition of what speculative fiction is. So the chances are something that you really like will appear in Aurealis at some stage, but you won't get a lot of it. If you're really into sort of, I don't know, the new weird, or if you're into sort of grim dark, or if you're into, I don't know, there's all sorts of different categories. If you're into high literary fantasy or something, we have that as well. We publish that as well. So it's an unusual magazine from that point of view, because the others, most of them define themselves by what they don't accept in there. And I mean, for example, Analog, one, probably still the biggest one in the US is effectively hard science fiction, is what that's about. And I don't know. I think I could send you a huge list of these sort of magazines that are around at the moment, if you're interested.
No, I suppose that in my simple-mindedness, I just got the sort of the physical image in my mind of going to a bookstore or going to your traditional sort of corner shop kiosk and seeing, the equivalent of Weird Tales or Metahar Land or something like that.
Well, that's how we started with Aurealis. We got a big distribution deal into news agencies in Australia, and it was sort of everywhere. Like, we had a big print run. Okay, it's not by sort of US standards or even UK standards. I suppose most European standards, but for Australia it was a big print run, and people discovered it in news agencies. They just this is interesting, and that's what got our sort of big jump, our big boost at the very start. But then it gradually, basically, printing costs killed the print Aurealis. It just well, actually, not so much printing, postage costs killed us, because we ended up getting subscribers. We wanted subscribers, and then to do the mail out, it just became more and more expensive all the time, and you had to keep putting up the price of the magazine, and each time you put up the price, more subscribers dropped off.
Yeah.
So we made the decision to go purely ebook, and we've never looked back. Unlike most magazines, I would say, we've increased our subscriptions each year. I mean, for the last, I don't know how many number of years. Not greatly each year, but we've increased them each time. Whereas if you look at the subscriptions or sales of most of the speculative fiction magazines around, they are on the decline. But the volume of the number of magazines that seem to increase. So there's still a lot of venues for short story writing, basically.
And for anyone listening, I've got some aspiring authors, friends of the channel and the podcast. Are you open for submissions? How does that work?
Yeah, we are. In fact, we have a slight bias towards Australian and New Zealand authors, because that's sort of our identity. So we are open to Australian and New Zealand authors. We sort of changed the dates a little bit, but something like from the 1st of February to, you'd have to look on the website, for 6 months of the year or something like that, right? We are also open to anyone, anywhere, for a month. And at the moment it's March. So if there's anyone in the world who doesn't live in Australia and New Zealand, March is the month. 1st March to the end of March is a time to submit to us. And we are open to anything that could conceivably be viewed as science fiction, fantasy, or horror, and we will just judge it on its merit, not on the type of speculative fiction that it is. We do have a bias towards. We say we give a priority to subscribers. They get pushed up the list. They don't get priority in terms of we pick the best stories we get, but they will be at the top of the list in the order in which they're assessed. So if you want a quick assessment for your story, and we're reasonably quick because we've got a big team of readers, being a subscriber helps. It gets you to the top of the list, and it gets your story read and commented on fairly quickly, relatively speaking, to doing it the other way.
And the website for people to check it out?
Well, it's www.aurealis.com.au. So it's you just have to just Google Aurealis, and you'll find us.
Right. Fantastic. And then Conquist is perhaps a bit of a departure in terms of genre to what you were writing before.
Yes, it's a historical fantasy, whereas I would say that the Books of Ascension is more just a third world fantasy, although it was heavily influenced by sort of Tibetan mysticism or Tibetan Buddhism and that sort of thing. But it's still it sort of was you couldn't class it as a historical fantasy. Conquist is definitely historical fantasy. It's set in a very specific time, 1538. It's set in a very specific place, Peru, initially, but it's and it's set at the time of the conquistadors, so that you've got that sort of interaction between the conquistadors conquering the Incan Empire and what happens to this particular group of conquistadors who are looking for gold, and what happens to them. And they actually, what's different about Conquist is that it is, yes, it's historical fantasy, but it's also a third world fantasy because they go through a portal into a third world. So it's quite different to anything else. I think there's not many that do that, both of that. I'm sure you now rattle off a couple off the top of your head that you know of, but I'm not that familiar. I read a fair bit in that area. I mean, I saw your interview with Tim Powers, and I know his stuff is historical fantasy, but it's different to what I've done. He is, as he said in his interview, the Los Angeles or the Las Vegas or the London or whatever that he sets his in is the Los Angeles or the London of that we experience, except there's all these other things happening behind it. And there's all this magic and really weird stuff going on. But it's basically completely grounded in what we have. Whereas mine starts in the real world and has a historical background, and the people in it, the main characters in it, are supposed to be people of their time, who then experience a fantasy world, entering a fantasy world. And I found that idea really fascinating because, well, I haven't read it done before, but also you end up with, in this case, the conquistadors were sort of devout Catholics for a start. I mean, and they come from, I suppose the Spanish Inquisition had only finished a couple of years earlier, so there was a very and there was that sense of they want to convert these savages to, or whatever, these other people to Catholicism, and I thought, well, that's, to me, that was an interesting thing to look at, because you end up in a fantasy world. How are they going to process that? They're not like we would process it. Well, I don't know how. I mean, how would you? But people have explored that. But someone who is a devout Catholic would then be faced with these things that sort of don't quite match their world. Obviously, they're going to try to think of it in terms of the belief systems that they've got, and I think that makes it really interesting. And a lot of the plot sort of centers around that side of it.
Yeah. I mean, so two things. One, I'm just gonna sort of self-promote a little bit. I'm so happy you mentioned that interview with Tim Powers, because I think it was fantastic. I think anyone, please go check it out, because it was just letting him talk.
Yeah, look, Tim Powers, great writer, and it was a really good interview. And he speaks so well about his craft. Well, he's I'd recommend it to anyone. Make sure you go see it.
And then in terms of Conquist, I have to say one thing that I was pleasantly surprised with. I don't know if I was approached because I was Spanish, and the book has got that sort of Spanish conquistadors thing, but I was so happy that whenever you use words in the original Spanish, they were correctly spelled and properly used. Because there's nothing more irritating than seeing someone that is not, in my case, Spanish speaking, and they either misspell them or they're not using the right place or in the right way, and like, okay, this guy got it right. So, did you have to research on that a little bit?
Oh yes, yeah. Look, I've found I get annoyed when I see German done badly exactly that feeling, and it's just I think, well, get someone to check it. I mean, first of all, my Spanish is very limited. I think about 30 years ago, I did a 6-week course where we did 2 hours a week. And because we were traveling to South America and we were also going to Spain, and I thought, look, I just want to be able to read a menu and know what I'm ordering off a menu. That's really all I wanted out of it. My connection to Spain was, I mean, probably my best friend from school was Spanish. He was like me. His family immigrated out when he was about 3 from Madrid. So, I mean, I sort of had that connection, but I really liked. I mean, the trip that we did to South America to Spain, we just sort of, my wife and I, we got sort of a real feel for the culture and whatever. And I sort of, I wanted to make sure that the Spanish was right. So I mean, apart from the fact I was pretty meticulous in checking it myself, I also got some Spanish speakers to check it as well. But there's a possibility that. And because I have a language teaching background, I knew some of the pitfalls that you could have. Sometimes you've got to not just check it. Sometimes something can have 2 meanings, or you put the wrong ending on it, or something like that, or whatever. And it's but yeah, I'm glad. I was hoping you couldn't find anything where the Spanish was incorrect, or
No.
Interesting you say that. The title of the book, Conquist. That's not a Spanish word, is it? Because
No, it's not.
Conquest, the word for conquest in Spanish is conquista with an A.
Conquista, that's right.
Yeah. Now, and I thought, oh, you can have a go at me about it's not a Spanish word, and you've got it in the title. Because I probably thought it did mean conquest in Spanish because of the conquistadors. I just thought that, but I mean, I double checked that. I realized it wasn't, but it was just the title that I wanted for it, sort of thing. So
no, I like the title. Titles are titles. They don't necessarily sometimes need to mean anything. Yep. But when 2 characters are speaking and they're using Spanish words, it would have irritated me. But you got a spot on. So, and I'm saying this because it's true, not because I'm trying to.
I don't know whether I've got the Quechua, the Incan language right, because there's a couple of bits in it where I put a bit in there. I suppose I was going by Google Translate on that one, but
always risky as well.
If you go backwards, if you get something, then go back and translate it back into English to see whether it's right. Anyway, who knows? I think I've got it right, but not as crucial as the Spanish there's not that much of it in there.
Brilliant. And I'm we're going to lead into my sort of key question of the interview. You've published Conquist through Collective Inc., right?
Yes.
How's that relationship? How does it function?
Okay. I first became aware of Collective Inc. when they were called John Hunt Publishing. Now, I don't know if you're familiar. They were recently, a couple of years ago, taken over. John Hunt Publishing was a friend of mine who works on Aurealis, had a book published by them, and there was a review in Aurealis, and I thought, who is this John Hunt Publishing? And I asked her about it. She said she's and told me about it. Now, they've been taken over by Watkins Media, which also owns Angry Robot Books, which is a reasonably big publisher in the UK, and it's a publisher, or was originally. It was a publisher which they would publish you in 3 categories. And one of the categories was you needed to pay extra for a publicist. They actually said, you haven't got, this is going to be a hard sell, but we think it's good. We'll publish it, but you have to pay for a publicist. Now, I like that idea of. I was going to, at one stage, I was thinking of self-publishing Conquist. And whatever, however that was going to work, I thought I must get a publicist, right? The publishing the Books of Ascension or the print books of those, for example, and I've seen the other friends of mine as well. It is, I know some people have a lot of success with self-publishing, but to me, it's difficult to get really any significant sales. And I thought, well, I want to maximize my chance. So the thing that appealed to me about Collective Ink, which is now what John Hunt Publishing is called, was the fact that they gave you the option that you could buy publicity level, the services of a publicist up to different levels.
Right. Okay.
And I thought that's what I wanted, and it's been so. Some people sort of frown at that and think, well, the publicist should be, working for you. They should be working, but well, they get paid by the the publisher, but working for you. But even if it got published by a sort of a more traditional or more conventional publisher, then the publicist, depends how much time that they give you. I mean, they've only got limited time. The publicist that I've got is sort of really good and is giving me considerable time. I mean, this interview is a result of the time that I was put in. And that's, to me, I sort of been around in the industry for quite a while and sort of know, got a feel for a lot of things, but I do my own, publicity, and I know how that works, but it's not enough often. I don't know. I've found that it's really difficult to do enough of that. And I also, the experience I had with the Books of Ascension, the very first book, Zenith, the publicist of Macmillan said to me, I wanted to do stuff. I wanted to do my own sort of marketing and help. And they tried to stop me. They said, no, leave it to us. I mean, it's crazy to me. They say the opposite. You should do as much as you possibly can yourself. So anyway, with Conquist, I'm doing as much as I possibly can. The publicist is doing a great job as well. So I'm hoping that it will cut through all the many good books that are out there, and make an impact. That was sort of my main thinking behind going with Collective Ink.
Right. So a couple of months ago, I think it was, I interviewed Dr. Eric Goodwin, who's the author of King of the Forgotten Darkness, that was also published by Collective Ink.
Mm-hmm.
And in conversation, so he told me he encountered, and going back to the previous point, of editing and word cutting, and he had to trim down the novel. Did you find that yourself? Because I'm going to tell you, the main issue I had with Conquist is that I felt, usually I complain that most books I read could be a few pages shorter to tell the same story. I think in your case, the book would have benefited from extra breathing space for certain characters and certain situations to develop. So in the back of my mind, I've got the feeling that you've had to cut down. Am I right or am I wrong?
Look, it's interesting that you say that. No, you're not. But I still accept that point that you make. It wasn't Collective Ink. In fact, Collective Ink, at the time I submitted, they had a limit of 80,000, and Conquist is 86,000 words. So it was over their limit anyway, and they accepted it without batting an eyelid. But no, the reason I wrote another novel, which I'm rewriting at the moment, but I haven't been able to get published in the past because people kept saying it was too long, and there was cut it, and I thought, I'm not going to go through that again with this book. I'm going to keep it as absolutely tight as I possibly can. I'm going to make sure that the action is sort of non-stop, that there's no flat spots. I had all sorts of people read it over time. I don't know, is there a flat spot? Tell me if there's a flat spot, because I'm going to get rid of it. Because I just thought I cannot not. I don't want to have the same comment again of it being too long. And also the other thing is, I conceived of it first as a movie, as a screenplay, rather
Yeah.
than a novel. And I wrote both the screenplay and the novel almost in tandem, right? I was working on the screenplay, did a draft of that, then went back to the novel, and so I think that's had an effect on the contraction of the writing and the action and that. I yes, maybe I could have, but I'm thinking, well, if you want to know a bit more about what's happening, maybe I can expand it in a sequel, and you can get more of a feel for some of the characters, the ones that aren't dead, in the I don't know. Look, yeah, I mean, it's a reasonable comment, but not for the reasons that you're saying. It wasn't collectively, didn't force me to cut anything out of it. No.
Okay.
They accepted it exactly as it was, pretty much.
Okay. No, that's fine. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's just, and this is just a matter of personal taste. Typically, I find that the books that tend to not work for me are the ones where we're just dumped straight into the action, without barely getting to know who these characters are, what their motivations are. Then again, I'm not asking for Robin Hobb style of 200 pages of someone making a cup of tea and being in the mine. Yeah, there's that. But obviously, that's what you wanted, and I think you got there. And I'm going to be honest, I did finish the book, so it's not that I didn't dislike it, but just the pace was a little bit fast for my taste.
Yeah. Can I just add one other thing? Zenith was originally, as I said, only published in Australia and New Zealand, but it did get one review in the US, and the comment was at the time, we think this is going to be too slow for American readers. Right. So I was aware of that as well when I was writing Conquist. So probably my natural rhythm in writing is somewhere in between the two, and might match what you want a bit more closely. But I did deliberately go for quite a really fast-paced.
I think that's definitely the case. So, yeah.
But I'm hoping that there was enough retrospection or thoughtfulness or sort of a little bit of stuff in there that did give you at least suggestions of a bit more depth and a bit more thought in terms of the characters and so on. I mean, I did try to do that. It's not just a mindless book sort of thing.
Like personally, I think the arc of the priest, like I would have liked a bit more time there to see that character and what leads to just fleshed out a little bit more. There's nothing wrong with it for my personal taste. I just wanted to see that evolve a little bit more slowly over the novel. That's what I'm saying. I think in your case, strangely enough, I would have enjoyed 100 pages more of the novel.
Okay.
But you've already preempted my next question, which was the screenplay, because I knew you had written the screenplay. Again, so just so that, because I don't know anything about it, is there a difference between a script and a screenplay?
No, I tend to use the terms interchangeably. No, I don't. I mean, this is a movie screenplay, and a movie screenplay, has a very specific format that it has to follow, extremely specific, and you've almost got, you have to buy some software to do it because it's just too fiddly to do it in any other way. And it's also very different writing. It's a different way of writing completely in some ways, because they almost don't like lengthy descriptions, they're all fancy words. You always have to sort of keep to the basics, and remember that it's supposed to be a blueprint for a visual medium. So you've really can only describe things that an actor can actually act, and something that can be seen on the screen, sort of thing. So it makes it very different. It's got to be written in the first in the present tense, which drives you nuts because to switch from one to the other is just really hard. You find yourself doing the just doing the normal narrative and vice versa, doing the present tense when you're trying to write the novel. So that's quite different, and it has all these rules about how you show particular things and what you've got to do. And if you're aiming for a big budget movie, which Conquist would have to be, it would have to be big, but you've got to do things like have the inciting incident by page, and I can't remember what it was, page 8 or something like that. And you really can't have it. I mean, in screenwriting, the one page is equivalent to a minute of screen time, effectively, and you've got to. So therefore, that means, and a movie really shouldn't be more than 2 hours, or you shouldn't aim it to be more than 2. Although a lot of good movies are, but they say, especially if you're writing a script as an unknown script writer. I mean, someone who like I don't know, Tarantino, or I don't know, someone who's really well known and they're writing their own script. They go for any length, but you've got to keep your page numbers down to under 120 or 120 at the most, sort of thing. And that is challenging. That is really challenging to do that, because I ended up going through my screenplay and I just looked at every single word. And now, can I rewrite this or cut a little bit just so that I can save another line? It's different sort of writing. Yes.
Yeah, that level of granularity must be sort of driving you crazy. So if you could plot sort of side by side the novel and the screenplay, would we see things shifted in the timeline, maybe?
Not so much shifted in the timeline, but a lot of things don't appear in the screenplay. And one of the criticisms of the screenplay is that I've had, or the few, I mean, people have liked it, but the few criticisms have been, this happened a bit, we needed more here. And I thought, well, that is in the novel, but I just couldn't get it, within the word count or the page count for that. So it follows the thing. But one big difference is, also the screenplay has the equivalent of the diary entries in Conquist, the novel, is voiceover in the screenplay.
Right.
You actually get Cristobal de Vargas' voice in the screenplay, and that I always liked movies with voiceover. I don't know. They say, like, I mean, Shawshank Redemption.
They're classic. They're classic. Yeah.
And almost I don't know, I can't think of another one, but I always liked movies with voiceover, and they say, oh, well, voiceover can be a bit of a cop out, but it depends how you use it, sort of thing. So you can't use it to it's sort of it's got to add to the story by it, and I think it does. So the diary entries sort of become voiceover, but cut down a lot. There's a lot less of it. I mean, it's at the start, I think you have. I start the movie with an image, like in the screenplay, the image is just a condor flying through the Andes, and then suddenly just disappears. And that doesn't really, that fits in with the novel, but it doesn't occur in the novel, right?
Yeah.
And it sort of fits the theme, and it's sort of leads into things that are going to happen and whatever. So anyway, you've got it, and that's a visual. You've got to have that visual, which you don't have in the novel. So there's things like that are different.
And I can see, having read the novel, how that image of the condor disappearing will put you in the mind of, what's going to happen. I like that. Yeah.
Sorry. And the other thing I was going to say, in terms of scene setting in a movie, and I've done it with the screenplay here, you just have like a thing. It's called a super on, I don't know why, but in the screenplay you've got to say super, and it says Peru, 1538. and you've got the place already, sort of thing. So you don't. Whereas you can't really do that in a novel. Or I mean, I suppose you can, but I haven't done that. That's sort of the last resort to just sort of name the place rather than actually indicating it through the narrative.
Yeah. And so what drove you to try your hand at a screenplay? Again, this is you seem to have your fingers on many pies.
Okay. I a number of years ago, I was I ended up getting I don't know if the system works that way in Spain. I was made redundant at work, which means they and you get in Australia. It basically means that I was working for a big multinational company, and they were just sort of basically completely restructuring and getting rid of people. And I sort of put up my hands and said, well, effectively, I sort of volunteered to be made redundant. I'd sort of had enough. I didn't like the way the direction was going. I thought, well, they're going to give me a payout. They give you a big payout, and I'll just sit and write for a while, on that money, sort of thing. So I wrote. So I took that redundancy, took the payout. And I sat down and said, well, what do I really want to do with my writing time now? What is it that I want to achieve? And I thought, well, if I was honest with myself, I actually would love to have a movie made out of a script that I've written. And I thought, all right, I've done it because I've done some novels and I've written a lot of short stories. And I thought, well, let me have a go at that. And maybe it was in the back of my mind a little bit before that, but I thought if I come down, let me do that. So that's why I sort of thought I'll use my time to write that. And I wrote the screenplay, but as I said, I wrote the novel at the same time, sort of at the same time, jumping from one to the other. So they sort of helped each other because I'd get feedback on the screenplay, and I thought, oh, well, that means I should make that change in the novel as well. And then I'd get some feedback on the novel. I thought, well, maybe I could use that feedback for that. So they helped each other, the two writing processes.
Right. And I sort of got a vague idea of once a book is written, the whole, trying to peddle your wares, so to speak. Yeah. But how does one go about trying to sell a script? And have you got plans have you got plans for that?
Yeah, I do, but I mean, it's completely different to selling a novel.
I can imagine.
I'm a member of the Australian Writers Guild, which is basically a screenwriting organisation, and I've been to a number of sessions about this sort of thing. And one person said, look, the thing is, the difference is with a novel, you've got when you finished it, you've got a thing, you've got something. When you've got a script, a screenplay, you've got nothing until it becomes a movie. Like it's just nothing. You can't do really anything with it. So the way that it works is you've got to, if you want to get a big movie made in, say, Hollywood or something like that, one of the ways forward for just a beginning, someone who's got a screenplay is to enter in competitions. There's loads of screenplay competitions. All over the world. There's one in Australia that I was a finalist of as well, but in America mainly. And some of them, the big ones, there are some big ones, they will, if you can be a finalist or win it, that gets the notice of people who are really actively looking for screenplays. So you can get attention by winning a big one of those. So I basically entered it in a lot of competitions and did reasonably well in some medium-sized ones, but it didn't win any really big ones or whatever. And also, what's good about the system is that they have categories. Like you can enter it in the fantasy category. You're not just competing against a comedy or something like that. So they have quite specific categories. And there's all sorts of there's other ways you can contact an agent, which I've done as well. But it's difficult. I think it's in America. I think agents have to be licensed too. So whereas a literary agent, I don't know. Well, in Australia anyway, you don't really need any sort of license. Anyone can call themselves literary agency, but it's much more from the movie industry. It's much more regulated than that. And also, you've almost got to sign away just by submitting in the US in particular, you've got to say, well, you're not going to, if they publish, or if they produce a movie that's sort of similar to what you've sent them, you're not allowed to sue them or something like that. And you have to almost do that to get it seen, because from their point of view, they have people trying to sue them all the time. And an idea, I mean, you can't copyright an idea, and people can have the same idea. I sort of get the logic of it, but it's anyway, it's a whole other world. It's completely different to
and it does sound definitely murky.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it does, yes. But I suppose if you want to get a big budget movie made, that's where to go.
Yeah, but from what I understand as well, like, would you be prepared for? You hear the constant script rewrites. There's all this stuff going on. Like, you've got your finished product, and then for a studio to come in and go, oh, we're gonna add this or do this or that, the other, whatever. Like,
do you know that? Look, I've thought about that. In my dreams when it's suddenly in light. Look, I think I don't care. I mean, I'll probably have to try. If I've got a say, I'll have a say and say, well, I think you shouldn't be doing that. But in a way, I don't care, because the way that I want Conquist to be is in my novel. I've done that. I've written that myself. No one can touch that. I'm not a filmmaker, and I'm not a super experienced screenwriter. I'm willing to go with what they do with it, because I've still got that there. It's there. No one can take it away from me. So that's why I'm not that fussed. If they sort of mess it up a bit, I prefer they didn't. And I'd probably argue against it. But if push comes to shove, I wouldn't really. It wouldn't upset me terribly, and I'd let them go ahead with it.
No, that's a very interesting stance. I like that. I like that. And it's almost as if, every screenwriter, if everyone could do that, like, my original idea was this, and this is done, and the rest, it'd just be nice to see your name rolling down on the silver screen, isn't it?
I mean, it's different if I didn't have the novel and I've just, it's my screenplay and that's all I've got. That's different, I would think, because it's no one will they are really messing with your baby. Then that's all you've got.
I get that. Right. I think that sort of pretty much covers kind of the things that I had in mind, and I'm very, very grateful that you accepted the invite for the chat. I've really enjoyed it. So last couple of questions before we go. This is something that kind of recurring in my mind. Do you think that I kind of lean towards thinking that everything has been done in fantasy? What's your take on that?
Well, I don't think anyone's done a fantasy set in Peru, the Inca Empire, and then conquistadors end up, in a fantasy world. I don't think anyone's done that before. And my attempt, anything I write, I try to do something new with it. Like I really don't like the just the cookie cutter approach that you're just following the same pattern again, which a lot of fantasy books are, but some of them are, a lot aren't. I mean, there's some really really good ones. I mean, you come across them. Patrick Rothfuss, I really think is quite as an interesting take on things. Tim Powers, we mentioned him again. I mean, his stuff is always sort of quite, it's different. I think it's possible to do something different with fantasy, but because it's a genre that draws a lot of sources of myth and whatever, it often goes back to the same sort of thing. But there are. I think there's still scope to be inventive and to be original, and I honestly think that Conquist is a pretty good attempt at that. However, can I just add that there's two things. I'm conscious of two things with fantasy. People read fantasy because they like that sameness. They do like it. People read the same. They read the things by the same author. They read big series because they like that sameness or whatever. And I get that, but at the same time, people also do want get tired. They want some, originality. They want some difference. They want some spark and whatever. And you've always got those two elements, things, most creative things, battling against each other. And definitely in fantasy that happens. So what I've tried to do with Conquist is to have something that's original yet still familiar enough for fantasy readers to say, oh yeah, that's the fantasy that I like, that sort of stuff. But still, have that two sort of those two effects sort of in balance within the book.
Yeah, that's what friend of the channel, Ian, he's got B&B Books YouTube channel. He calls it apple pie fantasy. It's like there's nothing thoroughly exciting, but it's apple pie. Sometimes you just want to have a nice warm slice of apple pie.
Yes,
before diving into something else.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. It's the food analogy is a good one because people do like. Most people like what they grew up with in terms of food. They just like it's their favorite. Yet there's also that urge to try new things and whatever. So you've sort of got both factors to varying degrees in people. Well, hope I've sort of got the balance right in Conquist.
Yeah, right. And before we go, where can people find your work and your books, and if you want to promote anything about yourself?
Well, you can check out my website, dirkstrasser.com, if you want to. There's a lot of stuff on there. Basically, some sort of something on almost all the short stories I've written, as well as background to the novels and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, have a look at my website. That's probably the main thing. I would think. I do have a Facebook page, but I don't post as often as a lot of other people on that. I've got if you want to sort of sign up to my newsletter, there's a newsletter button on my web page, and I sort of blog. I blog on there as well. So keep an eye out for that. That's on my website. And I tweet as well. So there's a few things like that I think people can sort of see what I'm up to and so on.
Great. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up here. Like I said, I've really enjoyed the conversation, so I'm very grateful that you joined me today. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Fantastic. Well, everyone else, but thank you very much for watching now or later. Take lots of care, and we'll see you soon. Bye. And